these two lectures and much appreciated. Longer I introduce Christine Anne, more time I steal from her, from the lecture. There is no culture, there are some who deserve lots of introduction, but do not need much introduction, because you are known, respected, and thank you for your activism. As you know, she is the founding executive director of Women Cross the DMG. And in that leadership level, she has been leading the movement, and her peace activism has been respected, recognized across the spectrum. Of course, not on all sides, but for those who love peace, are those who support Christine. And today's lecture one is historical and geographical context of the conditions for peace. And over to you, Ms. Anne. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. And can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. It's a small but mighty team, and it's great to see so many of your faces kind of from afar, and I look forward to being together tomorrow. So today I'm mostly going to, I wrote a long lecture. I hope you'll be able to follow me and not fall asleep. And at the end, I made a very homespun video with some images of our peace movement of Reverend Syngman Rhee, but also never heard before, Young is the only person that's heard it, of an interview that I did with President Carter. Because last week we all mourned his passing, and I think that his words are a really important message to our movement, and so that's how I will spend this hour with you, and look forward to a lot of Q&A. So here I go. Greetings to all of you who've gathered to celebrate the legacy of our beloved friend, mentor, teacher, and visionary, Reverend Syngman Rhee. Thank you, Reverend Chung Sung Kim, for your kind invitation and insistence that I honor Reverend Rhee's legacy as the guest lecturer for the symposium. Thanks to James Tanetti and Deborah Keys and all others for your hard work to put together this gathering. I'm so sorry I can't be there in person with you today, but I'm looking forward to being with you all tomorrow and Thursday to plan, to dream, and sow the seeds of how we can support Reverend Rhee's dream of achieving peace in Korea. James and the organizers at the Presbyterian Union Seminary asked me to provide some historical and geopolitical context of the situation on the Korean Peninsula, which is rapidly changing now with the crisis of democracy in South Korea, the further embroilment of North Korea in the Russia-Ukraine war, and the second Trump administration. Although the Korean Peninsula has been in a state of war now for over 7 decades, the dramatic changes in recent years make the situation in Korea ever more fraught. Many of you may be hoping that at the end of my talk today that I will present a clear plan of action for how we can get peace and diplomacy back on track. But let me be upfront. I'm not sure. There is a lot of uncertainty, especially with the incoming Trump administration. And it is times like today where there is immense danger, but also extraordinary opportunity. And when I wish that Reverend Rhee was here with us to provide a shining light on the path forward. But that is why we gather at moments like these, to reflect and strategize together how we can both avert a war and realize peace. I would like to start my lecture today by acknowledging how much Reverend Rhee meant to me as a young peace activist, and how his deep belief in reconciliation and forgiveness still guides me today. I can't remember exactly when I met him, but I believe it was in the mid-2000s when we formed the national campaign to end the Korean War. You all may recall that period when George W. Bush labeled North Korea among the axis of evil. And after the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, the Korean American community, many of you, were terrified that North Korea was next. So we had started to organize congressional visits, and I still remember this distinctly, this one meeting with then Senator Joe Biden, who was the chair or ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And so we went to his office and met with Frank Januzzi, who was his foreign policy advisor. And as is often the case when truth tellers confront guardians of the status quo, at times the conversation turned quite tense. At those moments, I was so relieved that Reverend Rhee was there to speak truth to power about the moral urgency of the US to end the Korean War. But he did so with such calm, peace, and conviction. Reverend Rhee possessed this spirit because of his remarkable life experience, gave him such clear moral clarity. For those of you who didn't know Reverend Rhee, he was born in Pyongyang in 1931 during Japanese colonial occupation before the country was divided. This was the colonized Korea my parents were born into and grew up, where they couldn't speak Korean, they had to adopt Japanese names, and they lived in subsistence poverty, giving more than half of their harvests and their income to their imperial overlord. Reverend Rhee's father was a Presbyterian minister, and in 1950, as the bombs started to rain down at the start of the Korean War, like the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Koreans living in the north, he fled south with his younger brother, temporarily leaving behind his parents and four sisters because they didn't realize that their 38th parallel would become a permanent border. When he landed in the south, he was a young man in his early 20s, and so he joined the South Korean Marines and fought against his brothers in the north in the Korean War. When he came to the US to train at the Marine headquarters at Quantico, Virginia, there he met an American who urged him to study in the US to become a Presbyterian minister, which he later did at Yale Divinity School and Chicago Theological Seminary. It wasn't until 1978, 20 years after he had left Pyongyang, that he finally returned home to be reunited with his sisters. He learned that his mother had passed 8 years before, and that his father had been arrested and died in prison. Instead of allowing the deep pain of having his father imprisoned and killed, sow hatred in his heart, Reverend Rhee turned his painful life experiences of war, migration, and family separation into a lifelong quest for peace and reconciliation. I remember him sharing with me how he had joined Martin Luther King Jr. in the civil rights marches, and that it was his experience walking for racial justice that had transformed his own negative feelings towards North Korea. He said, quote, "There are two options for oppressed people, revenge or forgive and start a new history." Well, that is what he chose to do. And his lifelong dedication to realizing peace on the Korean Peninsula and reconciliation between North and South Koreans and North Koreans and Americans is truly rare and remarkable. It was also incredibly courageous and pioneering. I recently spoke with Maud and David Easter, who traveled to North Korea in 1980 with the Quakers, and they recalled how Reverend Rhee and other Korean American faith leaders who visited North Korea were badly attacked by conservative churches. And as someone who has been attacked as being pro-North Korean and a communist sympathizer by governments, by media, and now an oligarch personally profiting from endless war, I draw strength from knowing that this is just a fraction of what Reverend Rhee and others in his generation endured. After Reverend Rhee returned to his hometown in Pyongyang, he went back to North Korea over 30 times with humanitarian aid, assisting families reunite, and engaging in peace-building work. And through it all, he remained compassionate, clear-eyed, and positive during difficult times, inspiring goodwill among the people he touched. One such person he touched, who was also dear to me, was Dr. Pilju Kim-ju, an agricultural expert and seed scientist who helped North Korea rebuild their farming systems after the famine. Dr. Ju passed away last fall, and as I reflected on our friendship over 20 years by poring over our emails, I found an article I helped her write And in it, she begins to tell her journey of returning back to Korea with none other than Reverend Syngman Rhee. Dr. Ju had met Reverend Rhee in 1987 when he was the director of the New York office of the Union Presbyterian Church, and he described to her the growing food shortages in North Korea, and he asked for her help as a seed scientist in improving corn seed. The following year, Dr. Ju received a telephone call at her home in Minneapolis from the UN DPRK mission. They were extending an invitation to her and her husband, who was an animal husbandry expert, to travel to North Korea and help them develop higher yielding corn hybrids. When they received an invitation to visit North Korea, Dr. Ju and her husband were deeply ambivalent about traveling to the communist North. She too, her family, she was born in the North and also fled down to the South. Well, she had grown up vilifying and fearing North Koreans, and she and her husband were deeply torn about using the expertise to help boost North Korea's agricultural production. But after much contemplation, and I'm sure much conversation with Reverend Rhee, they decided to accept the invitation because they decided that their primary objective in studying agriculture was to help improve food security for the poor and underprivileged. Reverend Rhee sowed that seed in Dr. Ju's heart, helping her overcome both her fear, pain, and prejudice. And for the next 40 years, she devoted her life to helping North Koreans feed themselves. This is the remarkable legacy Reverend Rhee left behind, and that we must, and his message, quote, "We must not demonize and dehumanize people, and we need to look forward for new possibilities for peace," end quote. Sorry for being so emotional, but these are people that have just been so dear to me and really inspiring mentors that have shaped so much of my peace work and my dedication. So here we are. It's been a decade since Reverend Rhee passed, and for me personally, a decade since I led 30 women peacemakers, including Ayoung, who's sitting with you, across the DMZ calling for an end to the Korean War, to reunite families and women's leadership in peace building. And while just 10 years, the situation on the Korean Peninsula has grown more dangerous than ever as our world. In addition to financing Israel genocide of Palestinians in Gaza and sending weapons to Ukraine to fight an impossible war against Russia, the US is involved in a new Cold War against China, Russia, and North Korea. Before I dive into this new Cold War, we also have to recognize that there are three major cross-cutting issues that are imperiling our very existence: climate change, growing authoritarianism, and militarism. First of all, humanity and life on Earth is facing an existential crisis with climate change. 2024 was the hottest year on record, and for the first time ever, we've surpassed that symbolic threshold that climate scientists predict will trigger massive natural disasters, like the fires now engulfing Los Angeles. The arsonists are the fossil fuel industry, oil, gas, and coal companies, who have known as early as the 1970s that burning fossil fuels would cause global warming and trigger extreme weather crises. Instead of investing in alternative energy, companies like ExxonMobil have funded misinformation campaigns to sow doubt about climate science. The world's largest institutional carbon emitter is our very own US military, according to the Cost of War Project at Brown. Many of us don't know this because the military is excluded from transparency requirements at the COP summits and other UN climate agreements. Now, how is it that the US military is the largest emitter of carbon emissions? Well, as of 2020, the US has 700 military bases around the world, and it's embroiled in at least 15 shadow wars with 170,000 troops deployed in 159 countries. Americans are often told that our military adventures are to defend democracy around the world. While professing to defend democracy, the US has long supported autocratic regimes or supplied military aid that undermines democratic governance when it's perceived to serve national security interests. Well, one of those very countries that the US has long supported dictatorships is South Korea. And as we are all witnessing now, President Yoon Suk-yeol has long been the darling of President Biden because of his willingness to go along with the US agenda to strengthen the trilateral military cooperation with South Korea and China. Like President Yoon, we are seeing the rise of authoritarian leaders with strongman tendencies that have contempt for democratic norms and a desire to amass power and wield institutions against their enemies. Military threats and militarism are intrinsic to these threats, and our incoming President Trump has promised to use the military to go after his political opponents, or quote unquote, the enemy from within. And he said he would deploy troops to carry out mass deportations without due process and in violation of human rights. To ensure that his plans proceed, Trump has promised to fire military officers who might oppose him. And just last week, he said he wouldn't rule out using military force to gain control of Greenland and the Panama Canal. While Trump's rhetoric and potential actions may seem extreme, they reflect a long-held emphasis on militaristic solutions that is hindering democracy in the US and throughout the world. A 2020 study of 36 OECD countries found that high levels of militarism were a strong predictor for lower levels of democracy, as measured by civil liberties, economic equality, political, cultural, and intellectual freedoms. The US is second to only which country? Israel, as the most militarized country in the sample. Now, the third major threat to all of humanity that drives both climate change and authoritarianism is militarism. The impact of militarism on democracy has been particularly apparent in the US since 9/11, as both Republican and Democratic presidents have expanded their authority to use military force without meaningful checks by Congress. The war on terror has been used to justify criminalizing dissent domestically in the name of national security, most recently with the House of Representatives' passage last fall of the Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalties on American Hostages Act. That act, which is widely understood as targeting nonprofits protesting US support of Israel's war on Gaza, would give the executive branch the authority to revoke the charitable status of any organization it deems supports terrorism. I'm sure many of your faith-based groups have come across this bill. These are the three cross-cutting crises I believe our world faces: climate change, militarism, and rising authoritarianism. And while the devastation of Gaza and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians slaughtered demand all of our urgent attention, we must also look to the most dangerous conflict that involves three major US adversaries with nuclear weapons: the new Cold War against China, Russia, and North Korea. And at the center of that new Cold War is the unended, forever Korean War. Many of you may not even know much about the Korean War, but from 1950 to 53, 21 nations participated in the Korean War, which was the most brutal war, claiming more than 4 million lives, mostly Korean civilians. It was the front end of the Korean War, of the Cold War, and the first war where Chinese and American troops fought each other. And although military commanders from the US, North Korea, and China put down their weapons and signed the Armistice Agreement in 1953, they never returned within 90 days to negotiate a peace settlement. And as a result, the Cold War never officially ended on the Korean Peninsula. And despite periods of inter-Korean reconciliation, intermittent US-North Korea peace talks, and normalization between the US and South Korea with China, the unresolved Korean War has justified massive militarization of the peninsula and broader Asia-Pacific region. Instead of ending the war as promised, successive US presidents, both Democrat and Republican, have pursued the same failed approach: massive military provocation with exercises, isolation through sanctions, demanding complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization before achieving peace. This is a no-brainer. This is not a winnable strategy, and they know it, but it benefits the US because it keeps Korea in a perpetual state of war that continues to fuel and finance and profit the military-industrial complex. Well, it's now 2025, and next week, President Trump will assume office. It's been 6 years since the 2019 Hanoi summit collapsed between Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And as a result of those failed talks, tensions on the Korean Peninsula have continued to worsen. Progress in inter-Korean relations took a turn for the worst when South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol came into power in 2022, reversing the progress made by President Moon Jae-in with the Panmunjom and Pyongyang declarations and the inter-military agreements. I mean, think about that, what they achieved. They led to a weapons-free joint security area within the DMZ. Both North and South Korean soldiers began working together to demine portions of the DMZ. But because the US, as the head of the UN command, was not willing to go with a phased approach and demanded North Korea's unilateral disarmament, Kim Jong-un left Hanoi disgraced, and the conditions have only further worsened. In response to the hostile policy of the US and South Korea, in 2024, last year, North Korea revised their constitution to name South Korea as a hostile state and has seemingly all but abandoned its long-standing policy of peaceful reunification with the South as a national goal. To North Korea, the DMZ is no longer a temporary boundary, but a permanent national border, which it confirmed by dramatically dismantling the Arch of Reunification in Pyongyang. That was the place we began our Women's March for Peace in 2015, on the 70th anniversary of Korea's division, because the Reunification Arch marked the beginning of the highway from Pyongyang to the city of Kaesong at the DMZ. This DMZ that separates the two Koreas. The Korean crisis has taken place against the backdrop of the great power geopolitical competition between the US and China, to the point that the Korean Peninsula is now the ground zero in the new Cold War. And basically, as talks are collapsing between Trump and Kim, the hawkish Yoon came to power. And then tensions between the two Koreas then took a turn for the worse. They engaged in provocative military exercises. I think in 1 year, North Korea tested 200 missiles. And they have been launching balloons. The conservative faith groups in South Korea have been launching balloons carrying Bibles and other propaganda, and then the North Koreans have been launching balloons carrying trash. And so they've just been threatening each other with mutual annihilation. And so here we are with this new Cold War, increasing militarization of the region, which is just further complicating any efforts towards peace and reconciliation. And at the same time, North Korea, feeling like there's no prospect with normalization with the West, has chosen to further strengthen its alliance with Russia. It's become a key ally and supplier of arms and now manpower to the Russian military. This is the first war in which North Korea has sent troops. And South Korea has been equally belligerent. Not only have they been participating in these massive war drills with the US, but also Japan as part of the containing China strategy. The tensions between the US and China have gotten so bad that Mike Minihan, the Air Force general, predicts that the US will soon be at war with China. And so as we watch the Middle East spiral into a regional war and the Ukraine-Russian war into a global war, drawing in the two Koreas, unless tensions are diffused, Korea may very well be the flashpoint for World War III. I'm not trying to alarm you, but we have to understand the gravity of the danger we face and prevent a global nuclear war that will impact all of us. Using this threat also of the new Cold War, Congress has passed a nearly $1 trillion Pentagon budget. And if we allow this new Cold War to go unchallenged, we are on a path towards mutual self-destruction, with the rates of climate change fueled by more wars and militarization, and the seizure of democracy by authoritarian strongmen and oligarchs. We must awaken to the existential crises threatening our collective existence. So what must be done in the coming period? Well, one, progressives have an opportunity to chart a new course, to define a foreign policy more fit for the US and the world today. While we must not underestimate the danger of a Trump administration to our democracy, we also need to avoid thinking that reflexive resistance to anything Trump does is an effective way to defend democracy. Look, Trump claims he wants to end wars. So let's be prepared to do what we can to see that he does, rather than treat his diplomatic initiatives as a chance to attack Trump as weak, which the Democrats did, you may recall, when he met Kim in 2018. And what did the members of Congress do? They first responded by passing a bill capping the number of US troops in South Korea. We should be prepared to support talks with adversaries. And we can't just play defense. We need to offer a genuine alternative vision for security, grounded in the things that actually make us feel secure. Food, housing, jobs, healthcare, access to clean water, air, and a resilient environment. And that security is bound with everyone around the world. So as for US policy in Korea, I believe two things must happen. One, the US must signal a new path before something inevitably breaks in Korea. Trump must place Korea higher on his foreign policy agenda before it rises to the top due to a catastrophic crisis with nuclear consequences. Now we know that there are many naysayers. We have all interacted with them and debated them. They'll argue that the US has tried for 30 years to contain North Korea's nuclear ambitions and failed to improve the country's human rights, but that the Kim regime will not cooperate. Yet both Democratic and Republican administrations have proven that engagement works to de-escalate tensions and scale back North Korea's nuclear arsenal. As the North Koreans in this first period are unlikely to respond to the Trump administration because they feel burned by them, why would they trust them? So there are steps. This is what me and many others that have had some line to the Trump administration have been arguing. They can just take steps unilaterally without lengthy negotiations with North Korea to set the conditions for a lasting peace. They can prepare for peace and rebuild people-to-people ties. They should formally begin the process of resolving the 1953 armistice. And how they can do that, it sounds very technical, but there is a bill that many of you have been active with our Korea Peace Now campaign advocating for, and that is the HR 1369, the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act. In the next Congress, the 119th Congress, there will be a new iteration. We need to put something more tangible, like appoint, we know that there is a human rights envoy. Julie Turner is the last one. I don't know if she will continue. But there should be a special representative overseeing the formal resolution of the Korean War. I've been working on this with Dan Leaf. He's a retired lieutenant general, the former Pacific commander. He knows how nuclear war is waged. He says it's time for peace with North Korea. So the next president we should put this on the table and urge that the next president begin this process of transitioning armistice legacy entities, clarifying the US treaty obligations, and establishing truth and reconciliation efforts. And as citizens and as people, part of a global civil society peace movement, we have to pressure Trump to undo the travel ban. It has to sunset. He established that in 2017, and I would say that has been one of the hugest difficult obstacles that have been allowing people engagement. I think about all the important delegations, humanitarian and peace-building efforts that people like Reverend Ree and Dr. Ju led for over 30 years, and even our DMZ Crossing. This was possible because there was not a ban on Americans. This is the only ban. We can go anywhere in the world except for North Korea. And that is ridiculous because we have found that there were only about 20 people ever detained. And that was not because of North Korea just randomly doing so, because these people actually violated the laws. When you go into a country, you have to respect the rules and laws of that country. And so I think that we need to really mount an important campaign to really put pressure on Trump to sunset that ban. It comes up at the end of July. And lastly, we must keep shining a light on what is happening in South Korea and help ensure that that tyrant, President Yoon, is arrested and impeached. Many of you know that a month ago, he basically shocked the world by declaring martial law on national TV. He made bizarre claims about threats from North Korea's communist forces and anti-state elements. He ordered 300 elite assassins. These are the ones that are set to be involved in Operation Plan 529 to assassinate Kim Jong-un. So they stormed the National Assembly to arrest the lawmakers before they could actually vote to revoke the constitutional order for martial law. And you all saw, it was the most incredible scene. Legislative aides, the lawmakers, citizens, they blocked the troops with their bodies, the furniture, fire extinguishers. Lawmakers, they climbed the walls to get into the building, and they voted 190-0 to revoke Yoon's constitutional order. And so he was forced to call off the martial law. And now you see, they're in a standoff. Yoon is resisting to come forth to answer questions to the Constitutional Court, and he's doing everything to basically maintain power. And we, the United States, and the people of the United States must pressure and call on our government. Whether Trump will listen to us or not, it is still our responsibility to say, we need to call everybody's bluff. We are allies with South Korea because we want to defend democracy, well, yet you are allowing the desecration of democracy by continuing to support Yoon, or on the flip side, by not speaking up and calling for his arrest and impeachment. I think I'll stop there. I was going to talk a little bit more about, the threat of democracy in South Korea, but I think we've all seen how resilient it is, but they need our support and solidarity. I'm going to end with just a little video that I made, and sorry, at the end it gets really sloppy, but it's a video of I took an interview that I took with President Carter. It was November 8th, 2018. Some of you may have actually been at that symposium that the Carter Center, and I think it was the United Methodist Church, organized in Atlanta. And I was invited to be a respondent to President Carter and James Lady. Others that were there, I think Peter Prue from the World Council on Churches, and Jung Dae Kim Jong-dae, who is the grandson of Kim Dae-jung. And so that was an opportunity. I actually had the chance to sit down with President Carter. And right now, like after his passing, there has been kind of very intense debate about his legacy over Korea. Many of you know that it was during his watch that Gwangju happened, and that in fact, that it was under his time that paramilitary troops were sent from the DMZ to go and quash the democratic uprising, which massacred hundreds of innocent people that were just defending democracy. But then many years later, he obviously has done a valiant job as a past president, right? And North Korea has been one of his commitments, and peace in Korea has been was one of his lifelong commitments. And in fact, it was his stepping in. I mean, in fact, this story is very much tied to why I chose to devote my life to working for peace in Korea. And I was a graduate student at Georgetown at the School of Foreign Service. And Bob Gallucci, who was the chief negotiator during the agreed framework in the Clinton administration, came and told us the story of what happened in the Oval Office. He said they were planning to bomb Yongbyon. This was the early days of the Clinton administration. And they learned that North Korea was developing nuclear weapons in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And so they wanted to bomb North Korea. I mean, first of all, that is absolutely wacky, but illegal. But he was stopped. Clinton was stopped because President Carter got on a plane with a CNN camera crew and called the White House to say, I'm on my way to meet Kim Il-sung. And there was nothing that they could do. And when he met with Kim Il-sung, they sat down and they wrote the parameters of what would then become the agreed framework, which was the most successful agreement between the US and North Korea that froze North Korea's nuclear program and eventually began the process towards normalization. Now we know the history of what happened. George W. Bush came to power, axis of evil, and we know these cycles of bust and boom, prospects for peace, prospects for war. I want to share this because in that interview, I think President Carter says it very poignantly about what the North Koreans want. I haven't shared this just with Ayoung, and I think it's really important to share it with this community. And so I decided just the sound is not interesting enough, so I included some images of Reverend Reed and actually our peace movement and the way that we need to couple both a civil society movement, which includes all of us, and also putting pressure on our politicians to do the right thing. So if it's okay, I'm just gonna quickly share my video and then we'll take questions. So can you see my screen? Okay. Here it goes. I hope the sound is okay. And I used some captions, but they're not going to be completely accurate because AI is not perfect.
I hope that Trump and Obama will be successful. I'm praying that they will be. Because I've spent a lot of time, maybe 20 hours in all, talking to the North Korean top officials from Kim Il-sung down. And I think I know what they want. It's what Kim Jong-un is still demanding. And that is that we have a peace agreement with them. Peace treaty instead of just a ceasefire. And that we let North Korea have access to the outside world. It's not our welcome. But apparently Trump has decided not to do that. And I don't think Kim Jong-un is, I don't know, I don't think he's the kind of person to back down. So I think that's why Pompeo delayed his term, delayed council, whatever. But that's what the North Koreans have wanted ever since I met with Kim Il-sung. They just wanted to have a peace agreement. They offered to withdraw their troops back 20 kilometers from the border and move their artillery they could get Seoul back from the border and let America get all their wartime remains of dead bodies and to meet with the South Korean leader and to do away with the nuclear program and to let inspectors come in from the National Nuclear Control Program. All these things we agreed to do, and as Gallucci knows quite well.
Right.
And then he later negotiated those same things I already agreed to with the representative Kim Jong-il. So I've always prayed and hoped, and still do that we'll work out an agreement that will treat the North Koreans fairly. we've done everything we could the last 70-something years to destroy the economy of North Korea. We thought everything we could at the same time to boost the economy of South Korea. And still we condemn the North Koreans for not having a good economy, not having election rights over the place. But I think what they want us is to have basically peace, particularly in the States, and to have an ability to become a part of it, community.
Oh, I'm just gonna, let's see. Oops. There we go. Okay, that was my homespun video. I hope it was worthwhile. So I'll leave it to you guys for Q&A for the next 15 minutes. Hopefully you're awake and I didn't put you all to sleep.
Thank you, and thank you also for staying back, your willingness to respond to the questions. Anyone who want to ask questions, please do come closer so that it could be heard on the other side. Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay, then this is the right place, I think.
Great.
Any questions, please?
Any ideas for what we can do at this moment? Yes, thank you. Deafening
stands.
works.
Yes.
Hi.
I wondered if you could say anything about who you think your allies are in Congress. That is, who are the people in the House or the Senate who care about this issue and actually want to do something constructive?
Thank you, Stan, for that question. So in the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act, which began as a bill called HR 152, then introduced by Ro Khanna, and then it has now had 2 iterations after HR 152, and we will come up in the 119th Congress with the new bill. The champions have been largely Democrats. They have been Brad Sherman, they have been Barbara Lee, they have been Pramila Jayapal, Andy Kim, Marilyn Strickland. Now, like the real champions, I mean, that seems to change a lot. I think Grace Meng started out as a champion, but because of incredible organizing by conservatives in her district, she's not since become a champion. So what I think we need to do is we need some support from the Congressional Progressive Caucus to, which has over 100 members of Congress in that CPC, to all support the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act. And then I actually think we have an opportunity now with a Republican trifecta. We cannot just assume, and I think that that's been the very confusing thing. Somehow, Trump and Vance capture the anti-war message. And within their MAGA coalition, they have many that are anti-interventionists. And so those are the Republicans that we need to engage. And because Trump has said many times, he's ready to meet with Kim, isn't it a good thing to meet? And I think that we have to put aside whatever our partisan feelings are, and do it in the service of peace, because there will be these little pockets of opportunity. And I think Korea is one of them. So I really do, I've been encouraging Kathy Choi, who is now the new executive director at Women Cross CMC. We need a strategy, a bipartisan strategy. And imagine we've got 54, they were all, I think with the exception of 2 Republicans, they were all Democrats. So let's have a strategy to try to get all the CPC members, which is at least 100 members of Congress, and the House side, and let's have a strategy to actually engage the Republicans, because their leader, Trump, is saying it's time for peace with North Korea. And then lastly, I think we have a chance. The House bills never got a Senate companion. Well, we have a chance now with Andy Kim being our first Korean American senator. I think in terms of his politics aligning with the kind of pro-peace movement, there's a little bit of nuance and maybe some more education needed, but also in recognition that, you know, he comes from National Security Council. He brings that kind of framework. And so I think that's where the incredible organizing, especially of the Korean American community, will play, and the faith-based community will play a really crucial role. So that's my point of view, but I'm sure many others in the room have other analysis. But I do think that it's time for us to start playing ball with the Republicans. I know, how does that sit with you guys? AM. Yes. Yeah, and I'm sure that a lot of you are somehow active in it, but in 2020, we launched the Korea Peace Now campaign, and as with a bunch of other women's peace organizations, WILP, the Nobel Women's Initiative, and a coalition of South Korean women's groups. Well, what has continued as from that kind of the birth of that campaign is the Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network. And the reason is because in our analysis, in our shared analysis, as we set out to launch this campaign, we all agreed that the greatest obstacle to peace is actually the United States. And that in order to actually put pressure on whatever administration or Congress, that we needed a grassroots base that was educated, that was dedicated, that was mobilized. Like, let's not forget what Margaret Mead has often said. You know, it's only a small handful of people that can really make change in the world. And I do believe that we have made some important progress. We have definitely changed the narrative about the forgotten war. And I think that it would be really important for this community that has gathered to be part of the Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network. There are chapters, like regional chapters, but then there are various caucuses, like the faith-based caucus. And we have biannual advocacy days. And then there are opportunities when we can meet with the State Department to talk about the travel ban. So I think that, yes, taking the streets and writing op-eds and doing things to educate the American public about it is important. But when we actually mobilize together and we advocate together, we have more power together. And I think that we have to become a formidable political force with actual boots on the ground and strategy. And I think the more we can unite and mobilize together, the greater chance we have. And, you know, we need an inside-outside strategy. And thankfully, you know, God sent Dan Leaf to me. Dan Leaf is a retired lieutenant general here. He used to be a colonel in the U.S. Forces Korea. And he was the senior pilot to bomb Baghdad. Well, he is in regular talks with the Trump transition team. And so we have lines, and I'm sure many of you also have lines too, but we also need to, for those of you that also have lines to the UN mission, I know that the Korean American church leaders have had a long-standing relationship that was forged by people like Reverend Ree, that we need to also encourage the UN mission to be willing to be open. But I understand that they feel burnt and don't trust the West, and especially the US. But I think that we have an opportunity in this moment to help create the conditions for peace. But it will take all of our collective activism and organizing. So Ayoung is part of the KPNGN grassroots membership, and so you should talk to her about how, if you haven't been plugged in yet, how to do so. And Ayoung, you should chime in other things, because you're more on the ground than I am.
I was going to say make a suggestion. I think that most of us in this room might be in the leadership of movements, but the disciples who are following your lead, now more and more, we have given across the DMZ, are finding that the younger generation is waking up, to issues that we didn't expect them to in such a rapid way. Just in the last few years, climate crisis, the wars on the other side of the world, our own war, the diaspora, all of these concepts that are really active in the younger generation. I would say our next generation, possibly maybe, but they are the ones who will be inspired by what you can tell them. And so we exist here to give you whatever resources can help you, help them, so that you can spread the word more broadly. So the younger generation and the grassroots are what need to get fired up more.
Well, can I just see a show of hands of who in the room has done peace or humanitarian missions to North Korea in the past?
What did you say?
Who has gone to North Korea on peace or humanitarian missions? I see Reverend Chung, yes. So just one, Reverend Chung?
So
We
far.
need to have another humanitarian faith delegation go.
Yeah.
We need to revive it. I just think, my gosh,
Well, because of the travel ban, so many people are afraid of even thinking of.
I know, but let's try to get the special validation passports.
And
You know,
this
we
special
really,
validation passport is something that the State Department will look at to see what is your purpose for wanting to go there. And if you sort of qualify under humanitarian, you are given slightly better chances. So we can do this, just come together and try to apply for the special validation passport. I tried, I was denied, but I'm not going to stop there. I'm going to try again. And we'll keep trying. The more you hammer on the door, the better. First they use the excuse, they don't even want you there. Then they said, well, COVID, we can't go there anyway. So now what's their excuse? Well, they don't like us, but of course, we want to like you. We want to know you. That should be a humanitarian priority.
yeah, but I think thinking of ways that we can help, and that's where I think we really need the older generation Korean American faith leaders that have played an important role in the 90s and the 2000s to really help gather and re-engage with the UN mission to try to help facilitate. I can't underscore enough the importance of this community. When I think about all the times of really terrifying impasse and all lines of communication that have been shut down. Really, it's been the faith, it's been the Christian, it's been the World Council of Churches, National Council of Churches, Korea. You guys have been the ones that have always maintained a steady line of communication. So in many ways, we need you guys to really help guide this new era and this new period. So I'm coming to brainstorm with you, but let's really strategize together how we can revive this, because I don't think we want to just leave peace building in the hands of the Trump administration. We need to take it also in the hands of the people and I'm ready to dream big and be bold, because that's what the times call for.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. Can you see me? Don Hoagie. I have a question. You want to talk about more the democracy of South Korea? Korea divided, now South Korea divided, also the churches are divided. And I really see the young women, 20s, 30s, participating in this process. Can you respond to that kind of movement going on in South Korea?
Oh, yes. It's so inspiring. Gosh, I mean, Yoon was narrowly elected in 2022, and in fact, he ran on a platform that was anti-women, that was like so misogynistic. He promised to abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality, and you know, he wanted more women to have children without changing the structural conditions that make it so difficult for South Korean women to even have children and raise them humanely and with dignity. And so I think it's a real, it's an amazing development. And I think that the history, I don't know for sure with certainty, but you know, remember the Candlelight Revolution in 2016 that ultimately like ousted and impeached Park Geun-hye? Well, that Candlelight Revolution, which now it's the K-pop, you know, whatever, the K-pop lights. And, but before then, it was actually one of our close colleagues, Ko Yu-gyam. She was part of the group, the very nascent group that started to protest outside of Yongsan. Because you may remember during the Bush administration, when the US military soldiers, they ran over and killed 2 young South Korean girls that were walking to a birthday party, and they ran over them and killed them in a US military tank. And there was no retribution, no consequences for that. And that spawned, and you know, that plus all the crimes committed against South Korean civilians around the bases. And of course, you may remember the horrific, brutal murder of Yoon Gung-hee. She was the woman that worked in one of the camp towns, and Sergeant Merkel had brutally tortured and raped her and just like did horrific, unimaginable things to this woman's body. And so there was just this mass outrage against the US, and there were protests, and that was the beginning of the candlelight vigils in the nighttime. And in fact, in 2005, I went to South Korea because there was the struggle against the US military base at Camp Humphreys. They were trying to expand it, and they were seizing the land of the neighbors, Daechuri and Doduri in Pyeongtaek, and these were farmers that had, you know, cultivated this land for 3 generations. And I remember the candlelight vigils, and so there's something so powerful of the origins of this long, multi-generational struggle, but that women have been so much at the forefront to challenge this kind of patriarchy, challenge this authoritarianism. And in fact, I have a piece today in the Chronicle of Philanthropy about the role of feminists and the feminist playbook as a counter to this authoritarian strongman that we are witnessing all around the world. And so I am happy, I'll send it to AM that she can share with you. I'll see you all tomorrow, and I'm happy to share that with you. But I think that is an incredible sign of hope, because what we're all struggling for is also greater democracy. And that means the inclusion of everyone, and especially those that have been historically marginalized and excluded. And so I think that bodes well for the future that we are shaping and building together. Okay, I should probably run because I'm an hour in, I have to pack and go to the airport. So, but I'm so excited to be there with you, because these are the kinds of gatherings that will spark lots of ideas and that will set the path forward, light the way for what we need to do in the coming period. So thank you for gathering, thank you for having me, and I'm just so thrilled to be with all of you.
Safe travels, and thank you for this lecture. She asked me what range of knowledge. I said there are people like me who don't know much, but there are people like you who know a lot. And she did make sure that there is that clarity and for the confidence or the courage, wisdom and grace that you bring. Safe travels, we'll see you tomorrow. And let us take 30 minutes for reconnections and come back for introductions. Bye.
Thank you everyone.